Hello and welcome to Can You Hear Me at the Back, the podcast about all things voice and communication. Hi Aundrea.
Hey Leon.
In sound and a movement, how are you feeling? I do feel like that needs an explanation or discussion.
I don't even know. I think I've been working a lot with the soft palate recently. And then it just came out.
Sure.
And I wanted to give it to people, so I did the movement with it. Yeah, and a sound and a movement. How are you feeling?
Only because my head hurts.
Oh.
I think my blood pressure just raised for no particular reason.
Hmm.
So it's a bit tingly.
That's not good.
I mean, it's the daily thing of my life. I'll go to the doctor next week and I'll sort it out.
That's good.
Which is basically just more drugs. Yay, more drugs. Don't take drugs, kids, unless they're prescribed.
Drugs are bad, okay.
So, what are we talking about today?
We are talking about voice and acting.
Voice and the Actor.
Voice and the actor.
A book by Cicely Berry.
It is.
Oh, dear Cicely Berry. But, voice and acting.
Yes.
What was it we said in the 2 episodes ago?
So this is one of the offshoots again from the episode where we talked about what's a voice coach.
Mm-hmm.
And we had talked about coaching in 3 different aspects. So coaching in the anatomical and sociological aspects, in the acting or voice and acting aspect, and then voice as in teaching, coaching voice in communication for voice users in a professional context. And that kind of a thing, and like a corporate kind of a presentational aspect. So this is voice and acting. Yes.
As my friend said the other day about corporate coaching, he was like, well, that's when you work with normal people, right? I was like, well, normal with a small n, but sure. He was like, as opposed to us. I was like, oh yeah, I suppose that's kind of true.
Actors are people.
Actors are people too.
As we expressed in our last episode.
Actors are peoples too.
Yeah.
Peoples. I mean, I can't conjugate anything today.
Well, it's very New York-like peoples. We use peoples.
Do you?
Yeah.
Peoples.
Mhm.
In the apple. Big apple. Sure. Throwback to
That was a
episode 1.
Our sound quality has gotten a lot better since then.
It is. We've worked out how to make it bi-directional in pickup and also...
We basically just learned how to use our mic again.
and audition.
Yeah.
If I understand.
Mm.
I mean, you guys don't need to know this. That's not important right now.
No. Let's talk about voice and acting.
Sure.
So, yeah, were you going to ask my question?
No, I was... Yeah.
So, I have here that it's the expression within an imaginative construct. The art of making yourself heard and understood in a manner that's unnatural to the self, but appears natural to others. You said that.
Did I say that?
You said it, and I wrote it down because I thought we're gonna need that, and also that sounds really.
Sounds kind of smart. I must have had sleep that day. I had almost no sleep today.
You did have sleep that day. Yeah.
I think it was
you
like after my 10.5 hour shift of sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. I had 4 hours sleep, so fine. Yeah, an expression within an imaginative construct or context. Like it's just, it's like, it's imagined. It's all crazy. It's all not real. You're living in a world that doesn't really exist, and yet it does exist. It exists in your mind. It exists in that playing space. It exists in the minds and hearts, dare we say, of the audience members.
You're doing it right.
So good. So poetic. But often it doesn't feel natural to self.
Right.
I had an Instagram message from somebody who came to see me in the show the other week, and she said, "I've just been watching your Instagram videos about coming to do accent classes or acting classes or whatever." I was like, "Oh yeah." And she said, "You sound so different from your character." I was like, "Yeah, it's called acting, and it's called vocal characterization choice." And she's just, it was just astonishing. I thought you were, terribly posh. And I'm like, no, I'm really not, but okay. So it sort of worked, and, she was terribly nice about it. But it was interesting to sort of have somebody point that out and just say, hey, you sound different. Well, yeah.
There is somebody, and I want to say it was Ethan Hawke, but I can't remember who it was, who was talking about the difference between fans and fans of theatre and fans of film and television, and that there tends to be this idea. There tends to be I don't think it was Ethan Hawke, I think it was Martin Freeman, but anyway, there tends to be
so different,
very different people.
Martin Freeman. So different.
But there tends to be this idea that in theatre there's a separation. So there's a person on the stage, and then that person on the stage gets off the stage and has a life and goes and does something.
Okay.
But because film and television, you might not see that person. Do you know what I mean? That's the only representation that you see of them ever. That people get confused about what is the actor's voice and what is what is the character's voice, and then what is you as an actor, as a person roaming around the world's voice, and that those tend to, in a lot of people's minds, especially in television and film, tend to converge into one entity that gets put onto you.
I also think it's to do with people having to leave the house.
That's it.
I think it's also to do with, if you go and watch something in the cinema, which I don't do because people annoy me, just wait for it to come out on DVD or streamed on Netflix. I'm so old. DVD, please.
I know.
Anyway, can't remember the last time I bought a DVD. Although we did watch one the other day. Elaine Stritch Live at Liberty. Oh, so good.
Love her.
Oh. But if you have to leave the house to go and watch something, if you go to the cinema, then yeah, you might see something, but you're very consciously at the cinema. You're not in the room with that person unless you happen to go to the premiere, or a special screening. But the other place that you're going to watch films and watch the predominance of television or streaming services, maybe even a DVD if you're aged, is at home. It's at home. So you're sitting there in your pants watching it, so what? Whereas when you go to the theatre, very, very certainly with lots of other people, and there is genuinely a human being breathing the same air as you, doing acting in front of you. And then the fourth wall breaks and everybody applauds them at the end, and they take a bow to say thank you and to placate the audience and that sort of thing. And so there's this interaction, which is you clapping, going, yeah, you're well done, and the actor going, thank you very much, and thank you for paying attention, and thank you for being here, and how wonderful. Okay, I'm going now. And then the curtain falls, and then the actors walk off stage. So there's a sort of finite quality to it, and yet you've still been in the room with that person.
Right.
Whereas you can pause your streaming service, you can pause your movie, and make a cup of tea or make dinner or stop it and watch it the next day. So there's a kind of control that you have over it that you don't have over theatre in the same way. So it kind of, I think that does mess with people's heads. Yeah,
I mean, and that's all about perception, isn't it? And I think there's something really unique about acting and voice and perception that goes with that as well. There was because this happens a lot with accents, particularly where people get for instance. I, for the longest time, did not know that Idris Elba was British because I had only seen him in American movies, and then that.
And The Wire, right? So
and The Wire, which is one of my favorite shows. Yeah. So I had no idea. That he was.
I didn't either. For ages. And then he was in Luther.
Yes.
On the BBC.
And I was like, what a great accent.
You were like, what a great accent. I was like, oh my God, he's from Hackney. Because I knew where in London he was from, because I could tell. And then I was like, oh my God, he's from Hackney. And then I Googled him and I was like, oh, he genuinely is from Hackney.
He's
How exciting.
From Hackney.
Actually from here. How brilliant. Yeah, and then when they were making Luther, I was up for quite a lot of the episodes and never got a part. So
Yeah.
thanks, guys.
Yes, they do. They're doing another season, aren't they?
Were they?
I think so. I read something.
It's a good way
I get I get Google notifications about Idris Elba.
Do you?
I think Google just knows that I Google him a lot.
Do you?
Yeah.
I mean, I think
It's
Google
quite
Alerts
sad.
is quite separate from Googling, but sure.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Let's pretend that that's not a thing and that you're not stalking Idris Elba.
I love you
Um,
in a non-creepy way.
it's good, it's slightly creepy.
Yeah.
So acting and voice and stuff,
Mhm.
rather than fawning over Idris Elba. So the act of communicating with a large group of people
Mhm.
in theatre. Let's stick with theatre for a bit.
Yeah.
Why not? Speaking to a large group of people is not like having a conversation within the pickup area of a microphone or within the confines of a 3 feet distance that you might be sitting across a table having a conversation with.
Yeah.
It's different,
Mhm.
and yet you have to make it look like you are having that intimate conversation and yet allow the audience to hear you,
Mm.
especially in an acoustic manner. You do, if you're not mic'd, which the vast majority of plays haven't been, but they
Mhm.
seem to be, it seems to be creeping in
Mhm.
here and there. And that does also depend on the level of intermediality,
Mhm. Mm.
as in,
Words.
yeah, like sounds and soundscapes and projections and that sort of stuff. And so how much media is there in the show? And so, you know, rather than make the actors fight with amplified sound, you might as well help them out in that context. But often and traditionally, doesn't need it.
Yeah, I think two things come to mind because I mean I think that's the whole thing about projection.
I wrote a paper about that.
Which yes, definitely.
Sure.
But then Barbara Hasman said something really interesting at the Northampton
Midlands Voice Conference.
Midland Voice Conference that happened in Northampton.
It did.
When she was talking about the difference in projection, and it just being. And one of the things that is having the intention of, even though we're having a conversation here, but having the outward attention of it being, yes, a communication that needs to reach other people, even though it's something that's happening right here, it needs to reach something else. Which also reminds me of the circles. The
Patsy Rainbird
Patsy
circles,
Rainbird circles, with the circle of intimacy, the circle of communication. And that being kind of the goal in terms of voice and in terms of acting with the voice and allowing that communication, yes, to happen on stage between two people, but also to include other people in that communication. And also, there's something quite interesting in, I had a professor who once told me that that film was a little bit fascist in a way because the director, you can only see what the director wants you to see.
Yeah, that's true.
Whereas in theatre, you
can look at anything.
You can look at anything, and there's something in terms of voice that also allows that as well, because there's editing in a movie, oftentimes or in television, and there's
ADR and
exactly.
a digital dialogue recorder. Yeah.
For all those who don't know the lingo, but there's very there isn't much of that in theater, and so a lot of times, even if there is a mic or there's amplification in some kind of way, you're still getting as much of the source as possible in that kind of sense, and that communication level as well. But then there's also kind of, because we communicate in very different ways sometimes. So there is a communication of, kind of like, I'm spelled a secret, and I don't know what, like there are different voices that go into that. But also knowing that, so there's an artistic choice in being able to use it, but then there's also, linking back to the last episode, a physiological and anatomical difference that happens as well to create that sound, and whether or not you are a person who wants to be conscious of the anatomy that you're using, the physiology that goes with that, or whether you're a person who's just like, I'm just going to work with the thought of it and put it into my body and see what happens.
Which is where it should get to in the end anyway, because you can't think about doing something physiological or anatomical while you're performing, and if you are, then you're clearly not in it.
Somebody once said to me, and I don't know who it was, but they're amazing and it stuck with me, and I say it to my students all the time, is that the voice work that you do is for the rehearsal or for your classes. By the time you get to the stage, it should be in you.
Mm-hmm.
It's too late to do voice work if you're on stage. Like that is not the time to do it.
Yeah, don't do the work on stage.
Yeah.
That's when it needs to look effortless.
Yeah.
Otherwise we're like, why are you doing an exercise?
Yeah.
So many students are still doing exercises and assessments. Why are you showing me that you're doing it? Stop it.
Yeah.
The thing that occurred to me while you were talking,
Mm-hmm.
especially with Patsy's circles, is to do with the notion that when you're speaking on stage, you have to invite people in rather than project to them, which I know Barbara has an issue with the term projection, which we talked about at length repeatedly. I'm sure we still will, which is always a joy. But it's one of those things that, and I completely agree with her, and to sort of define terms, I did make sure that I was saying that this was because most people know it to be projection and we understand it as audibility, so I defined my terms clearly. Right. But the point was really that actually what she was saying is that you're not sending something out, what you're doing is you're asking people to come to you. So you bring the audience to you, don't go to the audience, otherwise you feel like you're shouted at, which I completely agree with, and I absolutely know what she means. But there is a thing insofar as if you are inaudible, the audience is left outside. Right. Is left on their own. They haven't got the opportunity to actually come and be a part of. They're not being invited. So it has to be sufficiently audible for the listener in the auditorium to be able to hear what's going on, and then you can play with how sort of tightly you pull them in, or how far you leave them sort of sitting in the backs of the seats. Because there's only so much sort of craning to listen that audiences will put up with. Yeah. And then people are accused of mumbling.
Oh, yes.
And doing all that sort of stuff. And then, and sometimes that's to do with not having created enough sound in the first place. Right. Sometimes that's to do with imprecise diction or articulation. Sometimes that's to do with not acknowledging the critical distance, which is a thing from sound design and some acoustics. And about how we hear, and that the critical distance is the distance between the end of the vocal tract, i.e. your lips or nose, and then the ear of the listener. Right. Yeah. So you have to allow the sound to travel at its 330 metres per second across 330 whatever it is metres per second, that they're going across the auditorium, hitting the ear of the listener, and then it being translated into sounds and ideas and thoughts and feelings and responses. Right. But if you garble it, it's not going to. If it's too quick and you've not acknowledged that distance, then the audience member is unable to stay with you and keep up. That is
90% of the notes that I give my students because I'm like, I understand that you're acting, and I was like, I'm not your acting teacher, so I'm not giving you notes on acting. I was like, I can't understand what you're saying, and I can't understand what you're saying because you're saying it to, and I know this because I get this all the time. I'm a New Yorker, I talk way too quickly, but I understand when somebody's like, I just heard what you said, because you hear that a lot, even in just like in regular current communication, when you say it, and it's like, I just heard what you said, which is the process of I heard the word, and then I linked it to the thought, and then I put it in the context, and that sometimes does take a while, especially when you're working with big images and you're working with big grand ideas. And I think sometimes it can get a little bit tricky because if you're an actor, you've been working with this for quite some time, you've been rehearsing it, it's in your body, it's in you. And you've created this great and beautiful thing around it that you know intimately. And sometimes you can get a little bit, well, I'm very comfortable in this, and I know this, and this is me now. But everyone else is hearing it for the first time, normally. And so they need time to understand, or to at least look at, or be able to appreciate the work that you've done. So allowing that to happen as well is something that's quite important. But I get I get to articulate. I mean, sometimes I just work with people on vowels and just being like, what vowel? Which of the vowels is it that you can use in this space that's going to hit someone so they can actually hear the word, and what's important in the word so that I understand the word, because what are the phonemic differences that give me the word, because sometimes you don't need everything to understand what the word is, but then in some cases, and the difference between if we're going to look at like middle pairs, bad and bat, right? Sometimes I need the T to know that you're talking about a bat, and not that you're talking about something that is bad, and sometimes it's a matter of that. So.
And also that if you heed somebody's advice rather than hid somebody's advice.
Yes.
I mean, you can't hide advice. It's you can't have hid it. That's not a thing you can do with advice, but you can heed it.
Yes.
You could also have it in your head, but you wouldn't head someone's advice. But so just the vowel shift is going to change the meaning.
Yeah.
It's one of my favourite things to do with students when we're doing phonetics and accents. Is go, hey, let's list all of the checked vowels and all of the long vowels.
Yeah.
With an H and a D, or with a a T and a P or something. So we've got teep, tip, tep, tap, top, torp, toop, teep, whatever, tup. And they're like, oh, the schwa sound doesn't mean anything in this context. Yeah, tup is not a word. Top is.
But
so then we go, that's interesting. We're just moving one
and
sound.
what's really great is that I've got a lot of classes with people who don't have English as a first language, and I was like, so even though we know that tup doesn't mean anything, if you're coming from a different language, it's gonna throw you off.
Yep.
Isn't it? Because everyone who's got it as a first language goes, oh no, that means nothing. I know that. But then they might go, well, why? Isn't that what top is? Tip is that not the same thing? Because they don't have those phonemic differences in and an or whatever that is.
And what's the difference between the tip and the top?
Exactly.
I mean, is that not the same thing? Ostensibly it is the same thing.
Well, you can have a tippy top.
Right, but you could also have the top of something that is flat, but the tip of something would be the peak.
Yes.
So we make these sort of lexical differences.
Yeah.
And we make these sort of descriptive differences about what certain things mean in language.
Yeah.
And that you might just say, like the high bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
If that's the top or if that's the tip, it doesn't make any difference.
And this is one of the things I love about language, and I feel like we've gone language.
We always go language.
I don't know how we get to language from voice and acting, but I think this is really important for acting, and I do this in voice as well. It's that I tell my students that the writer has chosen particular words, and if they're a good writer, they've chosen particular words to evoke something that wouldn't happen if they had chosen other words. So even though you've got, say, tip, right, instead of top, and you think, as a person, I was like, well, what's the difference between a tip and a top? I was like, but you have a different reaction to the word tip than you do top. And there's something about tip, I mean, in my mind, and I think that's where the work starts. It's like, when I go, oh, tip. Well, what is my connection to tip and not top? And what are the questions that make me ask that what questions does that lead me to? And then you can start to do all kinds of beautiful work outside of that, and I applaud that, and I was like, yeah, go and find that. But my deal is that you're specific with the language, and that you know that there's a reason that that something is as specific as it is. Why somebody is furious and not angry. And what...
Or as our dear friend Katie Heath says, livid.
Well, yes.
Makes me die every time. Love it so much.
And
I've started doing it as well. But it's one of those that, yeah, you're right, and I say that as well often, and I also use it in a sort of personal context with that as well, and talk about the number of writers that I know, who are friends of mine, who genuinely will wake up in the middle of the night and go, it needs to be livid and not angry. Furious. Why is, whatever it might be, it could be any of these other sorts of words that you would have, any of these synonyms, and it ostensibly means the same thing, but it elicits a different feeling response, a sense response, a sensory response.
Yeah.
And so that's important, and to diminish that by paraphrasing or doing any of those sorts of cardinal sins is just not on. Just stop it. Stop it immediately, Aundrea.
I don't do it. I know my students do it, but I'm just like, no, it's specific for a reason. And it's hard work.
Yeah.
I think that's another thing too, is that it's definitely hard work. But then, I mean, to bring it back to the communication and the voice and the actor and the communication and the second circle, is that, you know, and we talked about before about an imaginative construct. And there's this wonderful philosophical idea of language and words creating worlds, right? Like, and so the specific language that you have, the specific worlds that you have, create a specific environment.
Yep.
They create a specific imagination. And if you as an actor are on stage creating something, or have created something internally that you're bringing external, you need to provide the rules for that, right? That you need to, you as an actor need to know that there's a difference between tip and top. But then you also need to convey that to the audience, because they most likely will not know, right? There's not, and there are some shows where yes, you have to do some research before you should do some research before you go in and sit down. But like 9 times out of 10, you're going to get people who sit down, don't know anything about the context of the show or the author or anything of that nature, and they've come to be entertained, or they've come to have this experience with you. And it is your job in voice, language, movement, and performance to convey the rules of the imaginative construct that you and your fellow actors have been building.
Yeah. And as soon as you flout one of those rules... using a flout word.
You were so annoying. We're inside joking each other.
But as soon as you flout one of those rules, the magic is broken, guys.
Yeah.
My friend used to go, shh, you're spoiled. Which is always a bit creepy.
That is.
Because he did it very close to my face, often. But yeah, you're quite right. Aundrea?
Yes.
What's your realisation from this, our 14th ep of Can You Hear Me at the Back? A podcast about all things voice and communication. What's my realisation? Oh gosh. I'm really with the word imaginative construct. And I really like that. And the realization is that voice and language are so important, or an important tool in conveying the story. And that words convey particular and precise meaning. She said particularly concisely and particular. Lovely.
Leon, what is your realization from this episode?
My realisation is that we've barely even scratched the surface.
Oh, yeah.
And there is so much to voice and acting, separately and together. Like an interesting couple at a dinner party.
Ooh.
So much to them together, so much to them separately. And you have to have a good hour's conversation with both of them independently, and then sit down with the two of them and be like, hey, how does it work with you two? Because this is fabulous.
That is a perfect metaphor. That is absolutely...
I went to a dinner party yesterday. Some very interesting people there. But yeah, it's kind of this kind of relationship, and you're looking at it, and there is so much to it. And I think more of that anon with people like the aforementioned Ms. Houseman, and some other wonderful voice coaches, but because they'll have a lot to say, and we know that, and
different perspectives from it too.
Yeah,
I think we both are quite language
savvy. Not really.
We're language people.
Geeky.
Nerdy, yeah. We're quite geeky. And what is it? And I had an in-depth conversation about the difference between a geek and a nerd too, because that's a whole other thing. But yes.
Oh, a teaser for next episode.
If you want to contact us about anything we said in the podcast, you can reach us on Twitter at CanYouHearPod.
Or on Instagram at Can You Hear Me Podcast.
Or you can search for us on Facebook and on YouTube.
Or email us at canyouhearmeattheback@gmail.com.
You can find me, Leon, on Twitter at Leon Trayman.
Or me, Aundrea, at Aundrea Fudge on Twitter.
Please support the podcast by subscribing as a patron on our Patreon site
The link is in the show notes.
to keep the podcast advertisement free, as well as get access to cool extra stuff, discounts, bonus episodes, as well as supporting ongoing voice research funding as well. Okay, love you, bye!